Hello, this video is going to cover how to explore and display weather data in FireFamilyPlus. Let's get started. So to begin, we are going to start and look at this working set. This is really where you are going to have all the control for producing different summaries in FireFamilyPlus. We have our ability to select our stations here, and I'm going to choose the FenRAWs. And here we have our date range. And you choosing to go back 10 years is often what we use to model what could be happening in the future. But the number of years that you choose is dependent on your local area, depending on how many large extreme seasons you've seen one way versus the other. So talk amongst your the people that work in your area and decide what data range is best for your location. For me, I'm going to choose to go back to 10 years and go back to 2010. Now, when I have make a change to my working set, I'm going to press and click off of somewhere so that it makes sure that change is saved. One of the major reasons that graphs are produced inaccurately or data doesn't look like you would expect it to is because there's something that has gone wrong in the working set. Either you changed it and it didn't stay, or you didn't change the right thing. So data years there. Next one is the annual filter. So if I'm curious about the weather summaries for my whole year and just looking at patterns across time for the whole year period, then of course I would have from January to December. But let's say I'm looking for only the type of weather that exists in my spring burn window. I might only display the weather for May so that what I'm getting is a little bit easier to understand and to read. So when I make a change like this, I have an ability to look and see what impact that's had. So I can click this R button here, which is to view all weather observations. Another place I could go to do this would be to go to Weather and View Observations and select All. And this just can demonstrate what this looks like as far as how the data go back. So I see that I have my date here from 2010. That shows me that's where it's starting, and it's only showing May. So if I close this out and I changed this to January, and I viewed my daily observations or my hourly observations, then I would see that I'm including January in here now. And what if I just wanted to see my daily observations? Then I would click this D option, and notice it would show all my observations only at 1300. So 1300, it's 1 o'clock. And these daily observations are always from 1300. And we'll talk more about when you would choose those daily observations. And then we have analysis period day length. So you'll see when we create a couple of figures that when you use one analysis period day length, it's just showing a lot of data, and it can be really hard to visually interpret. And so you can increase the number of analysis period days that you have, and that smooths out the data. You do lose some of the detail, but it may be easier to show, to demonstrate those changes over time when you have more analysis days in that day length. All right, so an important change you'll want to include here is this NFDRS fuel model. In 2016, the NFDRS fuel models were updated, and we want to make sure that we're reflecting those changes in the calculations that we're going to be asking FireFamilyPlus to do. So I'm going to select my Y timber fuel model for this FenRAWs, and it's suggested that you make that change for any RAWs that you're going to be using. Now that I have my working set all set up, I'm going to change this to the whole year. So for this demonstration, I'm going to choose a 3-day analysis period, and I'm going to make this just for the summer months. I'm going to make it from June to September. All right, so I'm just going to confirm that I have all those things set there. And now I'm going to go to my climatology tool. So you'll notice that there are a series of buttons at the top here, and those reflect the same options that are in these top menu bar. So we've got climatology here, and you've also got this climatology button. All right, let's look at some of the features that we have available. There's dry bulb, and then you have these 3 other temperature options: mean, min, max. Well, which one do you choose if you want to understand weather? Well, the dry bulb temperature is the temperature at 1300, the daily observation. versus, let's say, the mean temperature, which is you have the mean temperature over a 24-hour period from 1300 to 1300. That's going to give the mean temperature. And this is, of course, the min and the max for that 24-hour period from 1300 to 1300. What was the min temperature and what was the max temperature? So you could see that you would get more detail from using the min, mean, and max temperatures, but you might be able to see trends a little bit better when you use the dry bulb temperature. The general rule is to use the dry bulb temperature when you have a specific time in mind, like you want to know how the weather has changed over the last week and you want to be able to compare one day versus the next. And if you want to observe trends over time, then you would use your mean temperature so that you can understand the variability that exists within those days. So it's important to note that there are reasons that you would select one versus the other. For right now, I'm going to select my dry bulb option and my mean temperature just to compare the differences. And I'm going to produce a graph for relative humidity, and I'm going to look at my burning index as well. So some things I want to change here are these critical points. What this is showing me is that I'm going to have a line that indicates where the 90th percentile conditions and then 97. So I'm going to change these values here. And I will change these ones to be the equivalent of 90 and 97th. In this case, it would be 10 and 3. And now I will run my reports. All right, so let's see what we have here. First, let's look at the dry bulb. All right, so I have these two lines that indicate where my 90 and 97th percentile conditions are. And if I want to find out what values they are intersecting, those percentiles, I can click on this corner and I can see that at the 90th percentile, my X value or my dry bulb temperature is 95. So the 90th percentile temperature for this area is 95. And when I click up here on my 99th, I can see that my values, my dry bulb temperature is, for my 97th percentile, is 98 or 99. Now, one thing to note here, I can click anywhere and I can get values. So getting right on the corner there is a little bit tricky, but you can get pretty close. So let's take a look now at the figure over here. I'm going to double click on this side and it's going to expand that out. So let's say I'm interested in some information about the year 2019. I'm going to go to my options and overlays, and I'm going to add a new overlay year for 2019. All right, so I can see that this pink line represents 2019. And what if a question that I have here is about what the lowest temperature was in 2019 in June? Maybe we're seeing if we might be hitting some record lows or how we are comparing this year to last year. So I see this low point here. I could click on that and it's telling me that these are the dates that that low temperature occurred, and here that the temperature that occurred that was low in June was 63. So it tells me some information about my figure. If I want to display this figure in a Word document, my preferred strategy is to take a screen capture, and then I can, before I do that, I can adjust the size of this figure and I can take my screen capture from there. You can also export the graph. All right, let's take a look at some other data that we've just produced. So let's look at my mean temperature. So when I click on this 97th percentile and I get the 97th percentile for the mean temperature, it's a pretty different value, right? So we've got our 97th percentile for our y-axis, and then our mean temperature 97th percentile is 80 versus the 99 that was in the dry bulb. And that's because this is including that 24-hour average. This is including all of the daytime temperatures and whatnot. So again, it's important to know what you are creating for your figures as you are interpreting that. All right, so I want to get to my burning index now, and let's say it's getting a little bit busy. I want to change the way I display this. I can go to Tile Horizontal, and then I can more easily find the figures that I have been creating, and I can expand those if I want to. All right, so burning index is one of the NFDRS outputs, and there are often these cutoff points where burning index might lower below a certain value, and then we would consider the fire season to be over or slowing. So let's see if there's a line here at 20. What is the date that the burning index drops below the average burning index? And so here we'd click on this intersection and we'd find that Between September 16th and September 18th is when that burning index drops below that 20 value. All right, so I've created some nice overlays here, but now I want to see these three of my variables in combination. So I'm going to go to Options and Merge. And then I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to select average because I'm looking at the average over time. I could see what each individual year was. But for now, I'm going to select burning index. I'm going to change this value for burning index to, I'm going to change that, let's say, to green. And my temp, we'll call it, oh, and I want to use my temp, which would be the 1300 observation. And I'll call that one blue. And relative humidity we'll go with red. And I'm going to change the width so it's a nice thicker line. And you have options here to change it from solid to dashed or different types of dashing. I'm actually going to change my mind here. I'm going to go with red for my temperature and blue for my relative humidity. And click OK. Oh, looks like we missed one. All right, so I want to change what I just merged, but I'm not seeing the option to merge anymore. And that's because this is the figure that's activated. I would need to click on one of these other figures to activate that, and that would allow me to have this option to merge. Again, so it looks like I didn't save that relative humidity change that I'd made. So here's my merged figure, and I can see how these are interacting with each other throughout this time period. One thing to note here is that we have different axes for each of these values. So this isn't, burning index is on a different scale than temperature, and relative humidity is on a different scale. So it's important to note that these aren't, that you need to interpret them individually based on the different axes scales that you have. So this is for those 10 years. If I wanted to just produce a merged graph for only 2019, I could simply select that one, turn that one off, and then I have a merged graph for only that 2019 year. All right, let's take a look now at my relative humidity. So if I maximize this out, I can see that I have my highs and lows. You might think, well, red, technically this upper line, is our higher relative humidities. And if you want to produce a graph that is more easy to visually interpret, you could change the options here by going to Options and Graph Options. And you can change the colors of these lines. So in this case, this would be red, and this would be blue. We'll go ahead and set that default for our project. There we are. Now we can interpret this a little bit easier visually. So it might be important to note that this gray line here is the mean, and this is the max, of course, and the min. Well, this is relative humidity. If this is our 1300 observation, then these are the max, or the highest relative humidities amongst those 1300 observations. It doesn't mean that the relative humidity never got any higher than this. These are just the highest relative humidities at that 1300 observation. If we wanted to know how the relative humidity, how low it actually went or how high it actually went, then we'd want to be looking here at a different value where we'd want to understand our min relative humidity or our max relative humidity. So think carefully about the questions that you're wanting FireFamilyPlus to answer so that you are asking it the right way and it can give you the proper output. Let's make another merged figure just to demonstrate that process, something that you would commonly look at. And so I'm going to uncheck these boxes. And let's create a figure for our 1, 10, and 100-hour fuel moistures. And we'll also look at our herbaceous and woody fuel moistures. All right, so we've got a lot going on here. We're going to go and do our tiling again. And there are some of these that I probably could have closed out before I created some new figures, but we'll just close them out now. I'm going to minimize my working set and my graph options. And now what I can do is tile again. All right, so I have similar variables. One way that I like to look at my fuel moistures is as a merged graph. So I'm going to merge my 1, 10, and 100 hours. And 1,000 hours. And I'm going to do that for average. And we'll change this to 2 so it matches the others. All right, so now I've got my fuel moistures. One thing you might notice here is that they go in a predictable order where you've got your 1, your 10, and then your 100, and then your 1,000. But it's notice that these scales are different for each of those fuel size classes. So the difference between, or the distance between these two lines is not proportional. That's important when you're trying to discuss how these change over time. So if you want to create a figure for your fuel moistures that is proportional, that has the same axes, then that is something you would actually need to do in Excel. We're not going to cover that in this exercise, but you would export the information that was used to create this figure. And the way that you would do that is you would go to these individual figures, let's say for 100-hour fuel moisture, and you would go to File, Export Graph Data. And that would give you the tabular information for the data that was used to create this figure, and you could graph that in Excel. So similarly, we could create a merged figure for our herbaceous and woody fuel moistures. You're probably noticing here that the options that you have for creating a merged figure are those figures that you have created. So here's my herbaceous and woody fuel moistures that are graphed. So let's take a look at what a change in our working set would look like. I'm going to go to Window and close all reports and graphs. And I'll maximize or increase the size of my working set. What if I'm interested in my herbaceous and woody fuel moistures for the entire year? Now I can go to climatology, which is down here. And I'm just interested in herbaceous and woody. So what we displayed before was just a small subset of this, but with the story of herbaceous and woody fuel moistures, getting the whole story for the year is pretty helpful. You can see where these fuel moistures start to increase and decrease. And then when we create a merged graph for these at this point, it looks a little bit more informative. All right. So I'm going to again close all my windows and graphs. Reports and graphs. Now I'm interested in looking at precipitation. Precipitation is kind of a tricky one because it is not going to be something that goes up and down. It just has an event that happens. But being able to interpret some information about precipitation might be helpful for you as far as when precipitation has occurred over in the past. So just knowing that you have the option to create some precipitation graphs could be helpful. All right. So what I'm seeing here is that for this area, we've got precipitation duration and then amount is I can see at a certain time, well, I can look at my 2019 year and I can see how much precipitation occurred in 2019. Maybe for this one, let's do an overlay for the current year. I could do more than one overlay, but I'm fine doing just one for now. And I can see where we're sitting this year for precipitation versus where we've been in the past. And that will help me understand how my fuel moistures might be influenced from that. So precipitation is pretty helpful. All right, so let's move out of the climatology tool and we'll go into the wind tool. So in weather and wind, I want to change for now, I want to change my period back to just the summer. Let's say I'm interested in understanding the patterns of wind, but only for the summer period. I would want to change that back. All right, so I have a couple different options here, 10-minute average, gusts, and both 10-minute average and gusts. I like to look at these separately if I want to understand the pattern. Sometimes there are differences in the direction and then certainly the speed of your winds for your 10-minute average and gust. So I'm going to start with my 10-minute average, and I'm going to have these split into individual graphs. And I'm going to go ahead and close these tables and then choose my options to tile. And minimize that and tile again. What I'm looking for here are the patterns of direction mostly. I want to see if there are distinct patterns between the direction of day winds and nighttime winds. What that will help me with is if I'm doing an average of all days, all hours combined like this figure here, according to this figure, the winds most often come from the west. But what I'm seeing and when I look at my nighttime winds is that often at nighttime or in the early morning here, my winds are pretty split from west-northwest to east. And I wouldn't be able to get that if I were looking at the all hours combined. I'm going to go ahead and close that all hours combined, and I will tile again. All right, so let's do some interpretation of these wind figures. They can be a little bit hard to understand. So the first thing I want you to notice is that there are these concentric circles, but the space between those circles is different depending on the figure. So here we have a 1% space between each one, and here we have a 5% space. You could probably understand what the center number is, which is calm. So at 83% of the time in this early morning hour, the wind is at 0. And let's look at this 1200 to 1500 weather figure. It's only calm 8% of the time, so we know it's much windier during the middle of the day in this RAWS. We have this bar here, and it's strongest to the west. That means that the predominant wind is from the west, and it's from the west a certain percentage of time. So all told, the length of this bar is the percentage it's coming from the west, and that would be, since it's a 5% interval, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, maybe 26% of the time it's coming from the west. And of that 26%, here's the bar that says it's 4 to 8 miles per hour. It is 4 to 8 miles per hour, 5, 10, 15, 20, 21% of the time. So that is how you interpret these figures. They will tell you where the wind is coming from, how often it's coming from that direction, and the speed at which it's coming from that direction and how often. All right. So what I'm looking for here again are these patterns. Where is the breakpoint between what a daytime wind is and what a nighttime wind is? Because I want to make separate figures for that. So I have my daytime wind starting from 8 to 11, 12 to 15, 16 to 19. So these three are my daytime winds. I'm seeing some pretty distinct patterns here. And you can see that daytime to nighttime, pretty different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close all my reports and graphs, and I'm going to create a wind rows again, except this time I'm going to select only my daytime winds. So I'm unchecking my nighttime winds, and I'm left with these three in the middle, 0800 to 1900, and I'm unchecking this split individual graphs box. And I'll close these out, and what I have are my daytime winds. And I'm going to do this again. Oh, again, I have to activate my working set, otherwise I won't have the option. And this time I'm choosing my nighttime winds. I'll turn these three off in the middle. Oh, and I forgot to uncheck make individual graphs, so I'll close those three. And now I've got my nighttime winds. And again, this is for my 10-minute average. So I'm going to do the same thing again, except with my gusts. So now I've got my wind rows created, and I will go to tiling again, and I can see now I can make a report here about the wind patterns for my area. And I can see that although the 10-minute average winds are predominantly from the west, the gusting wind is predominantly from the west-northwest. So that's an information that I wouldn't have had otherwise. All right, so now you can create some pretty awesome wind roses. So we've been working on FireFamily Plus for a while. I'm going to go ahead and save my project. Actually, I'll close these guys out first. And maximize this guy, and I'm going to save my project. And now I'm going to compact my data so that I'm making sure that it's cleaned out. All right, so now you can, just enough to be dangerous in FireFamily Plus. Make sure that you're always checking back at this working set, that you're making sure that the adjustments that you make here have stayed, that you're working in the NFTRS fuel models, and that you are always questioning your data. You look and you see what it's saying. If it doesn't match with what you think, then go back and check your working set and make sure that you make adjustments as necessary. Have fun!